Thank you for joining us today for Annalee Dunn's senior thesis. My name is Jared Nelson, and joining me on the panel are Catherine Keenest and Brandy Westfall. I will open us in prayer, and then Annalee will begin. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for Annalee. I thank you for the time and preparation she's put into this senior thesis. I pray that you'll just bring to mind everything that she's prepared for and studied up to this point, and just help her to honor and glorify you with everything that she says. In Christ's name I pray and ask it. Amen.
Loneliness is a feeling of sadness because one has no company or the quality of being unfrequent and remote. As a surface-level diagnosis, I would say that this is an accurate definition of the subject. But can words truly describe the empty, physical aching in your chest of feeling devastatingly alone? What can describe a tearing apart of your self-identity caused by a feeling of complete isolation? And what could possibly fill that void? Answering these questions is indispensable, but above utmost importance is to curate an understanding that a proper perspective and knowledge on loneliness can help facilitate a stronger relationship with God. A huge differentiation to make on the subject of loneliness is the difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is often a choice, frequently made by introverts. It is a way for people to recharge, let their brains rest, and get some well-earned me time. Being lonely, on the other hand, is all mental. You could be in a room full of people and feel lonely. You feel as if no one is on your side, as if no one could ever understand this horrible feeling. Oftentimes, we will get swept up in this flood of negative thoughts. It can leave us vulnerable to feeling worthless, unlikable, and unreachable. Feeling lonely is often something you cannot alter, but you can alter your aloneness. That is the main difference between the two. One is more controllable than the other, and loneliness does tend to sneak up on you more than aloneness does. Being alone and being lonely do often go hand in hand, but you can have one without the other. As mentioned earlier, there is a physical pain that comes along with loneliness. Studies by various groups show imaging of the brain when someone is feeling intensely lonely. About 88% of the time, it activates the neural fear and pain matrix in the brain. Your brain does not really know where to put the pain since there is nothing outwardly physically wrong. This is often why people feel an aching pain they cannot quite place anywhere. They are just in pain. Everyone experiences this at one point or another. Some mistake it for a bad day, others mental illness and depression. Of course, depression and anxiety are real mental issues that must be addressed, but loneliness is often a caveat for thinking you may have one. It is the root for a lot of these types of things. Loneliness in your friendships can quickly blossom into anxiety about their every move. All of a sudden, when they're not texting you back quick enough, all you can think is, what did I do wrong? The fear of never having another human to rely on is detrimental to someone's mental well-being. It is suffocating and time-consuming to escape. Concerning depression, you have the same thoughts about never finding anyone who will truly understand you. Thoughts of no one would miss me begin to make their way into your mind. The world feels gloomy. When someone says something you would normally think is funny, all you can do is laugh and force a smile because your heart feels heavy. All of these horrible feelings stem from one simple thought: I am alone. There is such an innate desire to commune with other people and to be loved that when we are not, loneliness will take its toll. Concerning how our body is affected by loneliness, it is not all mental by any means. Loneliness is often associated with high blood pressure and heart disease, mentally and biologically breaking our hearts. Steve Cole, a genetics expert from the University of California, and John Cacioppo, a psychologist from the University of California, both agree on the fact that the level of toxicity from loneliness is stunning. Cole and a team from UCLA conducted a study with 14 participants who experienced chronic loneliness. The results show that their very cells were changed. Specifically, white blood cells remain in a constant state of fear. This is an autoimmune response to a sickness attacking your body. Cole states, inflammation is great at responding to acute injury, but if you have inflammation going chronically, it serves as a fertilizer for chronic disease. putting a person who is lonely for longer periods of time at a greater risk for chronic diseases no one should ever have to endure. This inflammation also comes with another stipulation. The body is less willing to attack viruses. Overall, Cole finds the response to chronic loneliness is no different from other sources of chronic stress, like low socioeconomic status and living with post-traumatic stress. You see the same general molecular pattern across a diverse range of bad human life circumstances, he says. Loneliness activates the body's generic stress response. When we are stressed, our bodies release the hormones epinephrine and cortisol, which, when they are in the blood, activate the genetic changes mentioned, like the white blood cells changing. Long term, that response harms us. Cole talks about when he started the study, he discounted how destructive loneliness had the capability of being. Now he believes it is a silent epidemic, without any great way to help it, besides giving people a purpose, something to work towards, something to believe in, perhaps. There is a reason why aloneness is a capital punishment. Solitary confinement is the concept of a man being so horrible to society that he does not deserve to be in it for some period of time. Even today, 2023, solitary confinement is used as a way to punish a crime worthy of jail time, even though a multitude of studies have shown that it has a horribly negative impact on the human mind. Prolonged isolation can destroy a person's personality and their mental health, its effects lasting long after the end of the segregation period. Although most commonly it is used during the period of interrogation before the sentence, it is often left unchecked and taken to extremes. Man was not meant to be alone in a concrete box with a bench as his only friend. This is aloneness taken to an extreme. However, to be alone is not inherently a bad thing. We may have been created for community, but it is inevitable that at one point in our life we will have to feel alone. Some people are scared of this, others embrace it. There are two main types of people on this earth, introverts and extroverts. The former tend to embrace it and the latter avoid it. The study of these two types of people would take up an entire thesis all by itself. Introverts gain energy from being alone. It is how they keep themselves sane. Extroverts, on the other hand, find their energy in being with people. Being alone makes them want to rip their hair out. This is a lot more complicated than these black and white definitions, but in order to understand how being alone can affect someone's loneliness, one must understand how being alone can affect different people. There are two main ways loneliness can affect a person and their desire to be alone. The first is isolation. If you are lonely, you can isolate yourself from society, or from community. You can isolate yourself from community. I cannot control the way these people feel about me, so I'm going to control how much I interact with them. For some people, it is all about control. They know it is implausible that they will ever control another person's feelings about them, so they control what they can, themselves and their interactions. Instead of making an effort with the person like they should, they completely isolate and shut down any sort of a friendship they might have. Having control is the most important thing, and risking their feelings is not worth it. The second is flooding your life with social events. This is more of an avoidance of feeling rather than a shutting down of feeling. You are afraid to feel the loneliness that creeps up on you when no one is around. As soon as you start to hear the little voice of loneliness in your ear, you automatically have to have someone else speaking over it. When you don't have anyone talking over it, or maybe it is too loud for that to be plausible, you start to spiral. The only thing you are thinking about are the next steps you are going to take to try and avoid it. The next day is the same thing, drown out that lonely voice. It is one massive cycle you cannot seem to break. There's loneliness with people and loneliness without people. So how in the world are we supposed to fix this? Why are we so lonely? What is this desire to avoid the feeling at all costs? The truth is, we are not supposed to avoid loneliness. We were never meant to escape or fix it. It is nothing to be embarrassed about, nor a topic of conversation to be tiptoed around. It is a gateway to show the desire for God He has instilled in us. It is a deep desire within the whole of humanity to be complete in a perfect relationship. Unfortunately, we can never avoid loneliness. It is not going to go away on this earth. But having an understanding of why it exists and how to utilize it is ultimately one of the best ways I've found to grow closer in your relationship with God. In my interview with Lydia Brownback, who wrote the book Finding God in My Loneliness, which is the book I read for my thesis, we talked a lot about what causes loneliness these days. The first issue we landed on was social media, the illusion of connection, and the way people only show their ideal selves for other people to see. There are massive benefits, of course. We can now keep in contact with people halfway around the world, while we never would have thought of such a thing before. Who knew a little square in your pocket could conjure such qualities? We can hear from the leader of our country, and we can see what is going on in the world and when. But there are also consequences. You are only shown the best parts of a person's snapshot moments of whatever they're choosing to post about. You are not shown the full particulars, just 1/10 of a second when a camera clicks. Social media simply gives one massive illusion of connection with the world. Texting another person and never speaking to them is not a real relationship, but it gives such an appealing illusion. Loneliness really sets in here because often you do not even realize why you feel so lonely. The artificial relationship feels too real in the moment to realize. The second thing Ms. Brownback pointed out, we as a society are big on picking up and moving our lives to an entirely different state, abandoning previous foundations. Culture today says that you should pick up and move at every turn. Jobs take you everywhere, opportunities will take you from one coast to another. Crazy amounts of travel, and all starting over with a new community. However, this is also an opportunity to reach out, create new community, and meet new people. It will take time, but be so worth it. So why do we feel loneliness? What is its purpose? Well, let's start at the beginning. Before man fell, as God was creating Eve to be a companion for Adam, Genesis 2:18 says, "And the Lord God said, 'It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable for him.'" Mankind was never meant to be alone. Community is so important. From the very beginning, God never wanted man to be alone. So he created another like him to be his earthly companion to walk through life with. But this was never meant to be the perfect relationship. That was always with God. Even when he created Eve, he said, "I will create a helper comparable to him." A helper, not a woman to form a perfect relationship with, a helper as a companion through life. Never in Genesis are the words perfect relationship used, or throughout any of the Bible. The Bible, in fact, says the opposite. The entire point of the Gospels is that God is the only one who is ever going to always seek us out, always forgive us, and love us perfectly, even if we are never going to be able to do the same on this earth. If you have ever had a friend stick by you in a hard situation, you know how uplifting it is. And if you have ever noticed God sticking by you in every situation, even more beautiful. Distinctly after an especially hard time, asking God why this or that is happening to you. What did I do to deserve this? As you reach your breaking point, all of a sudden you realize how he used this and that, and I forgot about that. This is quite common, especially with loneliness. Asking God why this person abandoned you or why that group of people doesn't like you, feeling worthless, etc., all comes to light at one point or another. A lot of the time, it comes down to how you were seeking after them and idolizing them instead of your relationship with God and his perfect love for you. The story of Elijah wondering where God is puts this into perspective. Elijah feels alone, as if every other man who believed in God and had faith had been killed or turned against him. God tells him to stand outside a mountain. He causes a wind that shatters rocks. He causes an earthquake, and finally, an all-consuming fire. God is not in any of it. And then finally, at the end, a still, small voice. God informs him of his new instructions and then casually mentions there are 7,000 people in Israel whose knee has not bowed to Baal. Elijah is not alone. And a few verses later, Elijah obtains a companion that accompanies him until his eventual end, Elisha. God always answers our loneliness. Most men in the Bible cry out to God about being lonely. Elijah in the wilderness, David before he becomes king, Jesus on the cross, Esther as a Jew in a palace who persecutes her people. Some of the people with the most impact on the entirety of history had the loneliest of times, and yet their relationship with God was ever strengthened. So the answer to why we feel loneliness? God uses the feeling of loneliness to show us where we need him most. On this earth, we will never be able to have a perfect relationship with him. This is why we will never be able to escape it, but let it be your guide. Loneliness is no puppet master. It is God's way of showing us that we can never be complete until we are with him for all eternity. So, on this earth, we are called to use our imperfect strengths, weighted by loneliness and worldly desires, for his beautiful, perfect purpose. Thank you.
Great job, Annalee.
Thank you.
All right, so to start off with, I want to go ahead and ask you, what are your future plans after leaving MCA?
So I'm going to Auburn University in the fall. War Eagle.
Okay, and what is it that you're hoping to study at Auburn?
I'm going to be studying animal science.
Okay, awesome. Why did you decide to choose to talk about loneliness?
I mean, it's something I kind of realized I was struggling with, like, I would say last year, because I guess I didn't even realize I had it until that year, because 8th grade, or freshman year, whenever we got, like, isolated, I was just kind of, like, chilling. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I get to be alone, like, this is so fun. And then sophomore year, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. And now I don't remember anything from either of those years, so I think I was very lonely. But I don't really remember them, so I can't say that I was. But junior year, definitely, I kind of realized that.
Okay. So do you think then we can be lonely without even knowing that we're lonely?
I think so. Because looking back, like, I definitely was. Even though I didn't even realize it in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In your thesis, you mention that loneliness is oftentimes something that feels outside of our control. It's just there. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you can remember from rhetoric, we talk about servant leadership, and we talk about the 2 circles, freedom circle, victim circle, and we talk about the 3 things you can control. Mm-hmm. Okay, what are the 3 things?
Who you trust. Okay, see, I've had this ingrained into my mind, and now it's just not there.
Okay.
Who you trust, what you believe, and
so
how you...
Your choices, your perspective, and who you trust.
Yes.
Yeah.
See? Oh my gosh, I knew it.
So would you say that loneliness is not something that cleanly fits into those 3 things?
I would say kind of your perspective on it can influence how you act on it, because, well, as with every emotion, like, it's not really an emotion, but it's kind of an effector of emotion. So, like, as you feel and as you kind of, I don't know, are down, it's all about how you, like, interact with it and take it and then use it.
Okay. So if it's largely this emotion or related to emotions, then can we still control it?
I think we can. Emotions you can't really control, but you can influence how you feel them. Like, not deeply, but like you can control how you feel about them, like in the moment. Generally speaking, considering what situations you're putting yourself in. So with loneliness, I would say, kind of, if you're doing everything you can to try and stay out of it. Like, if you're fearing it, then that's when it starts to, like, creep up on you. But if you're just kind of, like, living, and then it just creeps up on you, it's like, oh, well, then there's something wrong. Like, for me, every time I'm lonely, I'm like, okay, well, then what am I missing, you know? So, yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are some tips, or what are some things that you tried to do to try and cope or control loneliness when you start to feel it creep up?
I just sit and think. I know a lot of people have trouble doing that, but for me, like, I just sit and think.
Okay. What is it that you try to direct your thoughts towards?
I just kind of think about maybe the situation I'm in and, like, what's going on up there, like, how have I interacted in this way lately, or why am I feeling lonely in this situation? And then I just kind of process it.
Okay.
See where I need to improve, kind of a deal. Not that I'm great at that, but it definitely helps.
Okay. Do you think that loneliness can stem from too much contemplation or consideration of self?
Yes. I think for people who don't believe in God, it can influence them a lot more, because then they're like, oh my gosh, we're the only ones. Like, what if there's no other life in the universe? But, I mean, since we're Christian, we know that God created us for a purpose, and we know he's always going to get us through. So.
Okay. Do you think that's perhaps a good way to try and deal with feelings of loneliness or address feelings of loneliness is to actually think less about ourselves and focus more on serving others?
Yeah, I would say so. That's definitely, I think, one of the reasons why like my generation is so lonely is because we are just stuck in our minds because of our phones. Like the way, I think it's in Screw Tape Letters whenever the main guy is talking about like to keep people in their minds is to be able to control them, kind of a deal. And so I think that's one of the main ways or the main holds that sin or that I don't know. I don't want to say. I always feel dramatic whenever I say the devil, but it literally is. So I'm just going to say it. The devil has on our generation is he keeps us in our minds and kind of keeps us on our phones and like thinking about ourselves. Because when you think about yourself, you can't think about other. Like you're just stuck. Like it's like sticky mud. Once you get out of it, you still have to like wash it off.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time.
So what is
It's
it
really
about?
lonely.
What is it about serving others that can be so beneficial to help us not feel lonely?
I have found that focusing on others makes me feel more, like, I don't know what the complete, that kind of a deal. Like focusing on love God, love others. Like I know everyone hears that literally all the time. It's so annoying, but it's very true. Like love God, love others. And loving others, like it is what God calls us to do, and it can help you realize like how complete we are in Him by loving other people.
Well, yeah, right? It's, it's funny because we do hear that all the time, and yet we hear it all the time and we still don't do it. Right?
I think, man.
Right? And so I'm with you in that it's funny how that works, how God gives us these, these things where He tells us, hey, if you just do this, then your life's going to be a lot better. And we say, yeah, I hear you, but I'd rather do this over here. And yet when we choose to do what it is that He's told us, where we're supposed to love God and then love others, suddenly we find that things start going a lot better in our lives because we're actually trying to do what He wants us to do. And it's funny how I think in this case with loneliness, when we're thinking less about ourselves and more about God and more about serving other people, suddenly we feel a lot more fulfilled. So, awesome. Well, I'm going to pass it on to Mrs. Keenest.
Slay.
Great job, Annalee.
Thank you.
So, I think probably most people in here know the answer to this question, but for those who might not know you, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I am an introvert.
So you talked about the two main responses to loneliness that introverts versus extroverts have. Can you briefly describe those again, just to refresh your memory?
So it's whenever you can isolate yourself, which is basically like whenever you want to have control over the situation and you want to make that person chase after you in a way, like you want to isolate yourself so that other people are showing you that they want to love you instead of you just showing them that you love them. And then the other one is like over peopling yourself. Like you just have to have people around you all the time or else you're just gonna, like you're kind of afraid of yourself whenever you're by yourself, like that kind of a deal.
Yeah. So would you say either of these responses are good, healthy responses to loneliness?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously whenever you're an introvert, you need to sit by yourself. Whenever you're an extrovert, you need to be with people. But I'm talking about this more of an avoidance of your own feelings, kind of. Or I said it's more of a avoidance of feelings instead of a shutting down of feeling. So whenever you're avoiding people, you're kind of shutting down what you feel maybe in a group of people, or whenever you're overthinking the interactions you're having with them. But then shutting down, wait, no, I said that wrong. Avoidance of feelings is whenever you're with people. So you're kind of avoiding your own feelings. And then shutting down is whenever you're by yourself. So you're does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that either of those responses is better or less unhealthy than the other?
I don't think so. those are just the ways that I've found people tend to avoid the feeling most, or that's just what I see from, this is not like me researching and like finding an article that said this, like I have just noticed this, that people do. So.
You ended your speech with a sentence that said, where is it? Okay. On this earth, we're called to use our imperfect strengths, weighted by loneliness and worldly desires for his beautiful, perfect purpose. So since you've realized in the past couple of years that you have experienced loneliness, how have you been able to use that for his purposes?
I've kind of just come to grips with myself that, like, it's okay to feel it, and, like, it can help other people. That's kind of why I wanted to do this, is because, like, people feel alone because they're lonely. And so that is an imperfect strength for sure. And can you ask the question again?
Yeah, have you, since realizing that you've experienced loneliness, how have you been able to use that as a strength for his purposes?
I haven't, I would say more of me just discovering this and, like, understanding it more. I haven't really started to, like, utilize this. I'm not really sure. I've been trying to serve people better, definitely. Yeah.
That's awesome. So going away to college next year in a different state, how do you think you'll experience loneliness, or?
Yes,
that'll be pleasant?
I think so. Because I'm going there, like, there's going to be no one else there besides, Park and Daniel are going to Samford, so they'll be, like, an hour away. But, yeah, I'm going to be literally by myself. So it's a little bit of a challenge. Like, I get to challenge myself to keep in contact with everyone that I want to, and I also get to challenge myself in that I have to meet a lot more people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think this process of researching loneliness has kind of shifted your perspective about going away to college, or will help you?
I would say so. I've kind of realized I actually really love people.
That's good. I'm glad.
Okay, sophomore year, I would have been like, you're going to college? Why are you just staying home? But I'm actually going, and I think it's going to be really good to meet a lot of other people and kind of. I'm more a works person. Like, I'm not very good at speaking to people, so I'm going to try and be a light in the darkness at Auburn University.
Is Auburn the darkness?
No.
Okay. Well, I think you're good at talking to people, and I think you can be a light at Auburn.
Thank you.
So, shifting gears a little bit, so you clarified at the beginning the distinction between being alone versus being lonely. Can you recap that just real quick again?
So being alone is kind of like whenever you are actually physically alone, but being lonely, like, you can feel it wherever. I think that a lot of the negative emotions we feel are caused by loneliness. Like, the study I did, I didn't do the study. The study I found was the people that were like, they did find that a lot of negative emotions are caused by feelings of loneliness. And people don't even, like, my generation is so like, they encourage the, like, sticking in your head and being mentally struggling is kind of like the standard at this point. And I think that since so many people are feeling like, we're just trying to normalize it, even though it's not something, you shouldn't normalize it, but you should be aware of it. But I think we're, like, normalizing it. So, yeah.
So it's like you're almost trying to feel less alone.
Yeah.
By being alone, because everyone else is alone.
Aloneception.
Okay, so with those clarifications in mind, do you think Jesus was ever alone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was going to put the example at the end whenever I was like, there are men in the Bible cry out to God about being lonely. Jesus on the cross. I said Jesus on the cross, which, yes, he was like, what did he say? He was like, oh, I had this in my head. I was going to, oh my gosh. Father, yes. Father, have you forsaken me? And that's a really good example. I think one of the reasons why I think Jesus came to earth is so that he could experience what we feel, and so that we could relate to him a lot more. And so loneliness on the cross, obviously, and then also in the wilderness, whenever Satan is tempting him, he he has a lot of loneliness there. Like, he's literally by himself in the desert with literally the devil trying to get him to eat food and jump off a cliff and have the angels save him and take over a kingdom with him. And, like, he had to stay true to his father and his... Yeah, I think he was very lonely in that moment.
Okay. So you think Jesus experienced aloneness and loneliness? Okay, awesome. Yes. I'm going to pass it off to Mrs. Westfall.
Yay.
Thank you. All right, good job, Annalee. Okay, I want to continue talking about Jesus a little bit in the New Testament. I think the verse that you were kind of alluding to also was that we don't have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. So, like, he experienced the things that we experienced. And I was thinking about the Garden of Gethsemane. So are you familiar? Okay, you want to share a little bit for those that might not be familiar with what goes on in the Garden of Gethsemane?
Whenever he's, like, praying, so all of his disciples fell asleep whenever he was about to go on the cross, and, like, he knows what's going to happen. But the disciples don't know yet, do they?
I mean, he's definitely alluded to it.
He's
they're
alluded
not
to it.
the sharpest at times.
They're not the brightest.
So, I don't know if they do.
No, that's valid. And so they're asleep, and Jesus, like, he kind of walks away from them. He's like,
He sends them away.
Sleepies. Oh, he sends them away?
Part of it. Yeah.
Okay. I forgot.
But you're right. They do sleep.
Yeah, and then he's praying, and then he's, like, crying, and he's like, why do I have to do this?
Yeah.
He's like, why do I have to do this? Why are you making me do this? And then he's like, not my will, but yours.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think in that moment, I think we could definitely say that he experienced loneliness, right? And I think struggles with that same ache that you talked about, the physical ache. Yes. Do you think loneliness can ever be eradicated here on earth?
No, I don't. I don't think, I mean, whenever man fell, that's kind of when I think all this negative stuff came into the world. And I think loneliness is one of the bigger things because, like, God shaped a hole in everyone's heart. Like, you're never going to have that perfect relationship and that perfect love for other people and for God that he has for us. And I think loving other people is one of the best ways to get rid of it, to not feel it as much, if that makes sense. But, yeah, God is, it's never going to be perfect. Like, we can't be perfect. And I think perfect love is the only thing that can make it go away.
Right. And when do we get that perfect love?
Whenever we die.
Yeah, right.
Whenever
when we die, when we're in heaven, right?
Yes.
And so do you think maybe that lack or that perceived lack or that hole is more of a longing? Like a longing for the things to come?
Yes.
And I mean, I was even thinking about that in terms of, like, why, when we get our focus off of ourselves and serve others, why maybe that can fill, even, at least partially, that hole, right? And do you think maybe that's, like, maybe seeing how it might be in heaven through, like, a veil? Or through, like, I don't know that I can totally stand on it, but it's just a thought of that when we're serving others, maybe that's a little bit of how it's going to be in heaven, the community that we're going to have in heaven.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay, well, thinking about the Old Testament then, Job, right? You want to share a little bit of Job for those that may not know?
I mean, he gets all his stuff taken from him by Satan. So, I mean, all his... What is it for? It's like all of his livestock and his wealth gets taken away, and he's like, okay, God, his family. This is really tough. And then his family gets taken away, and he's like, okay, God, this is really tough. And then he, like, sits and wallows and, like, cries out. He, like, basically, all his friends come and talk to him. And then, like, after his friends come and talk to him, then he's like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Why are you doing this to me? And God, like, basically tells him, I store the hail in the sky. I made the earth. I have this dragon somewhere that it's not out, but it's not going to live until this day and age, but it exists. Like, I control that. And you are whining about your family dying. Like, that kind of a deal.
So do you think God had a purpose in Job's situation?
I mean, Satan kind of wanted to challenge God in that he could make Job change over to hit kind of resenting God. And so I think, and God let Satan do that. So God, it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible because, like, Satan literally goes up to the throne room of God and it's like, hey, can I do this? And God's like, okay, yeah, but don't kill him, basically. And so, yeah, I think it's good. I think he did have a purpose. He got all his stuff back eventually.
Right. How does it resolve?
He he gets all his stuff back and he's like more faithful, and all of his friends are like, oh my gosh, God did this for you. Like, he's more wealthy. He's got I don't know if he gets a bigger family. I'm not exactly sure, but I know he gets his wealth back.
Okay.
So
Do you think his relationship with the Lord was changed?
I think it was strengthened.
Okay. And so then even you mentioned in your paper about Elijah as well. Do you think there was purpose in in his season of loneliness?
I think so. Not exactly. I mean, because I don't exactly remember what happened before he was kind of out in the wilderness. I think he was kicked out of somewhere. And so then he's kind of by himself, and I think maybe he needed to understand the power of God, maybe a little bit more, because, I mean, he calls down the power of God a lot. And so I think God just kind of wanted to reiterate to him, like, hey, I'm literally the most powerful thing in the universe, and you are my current vessel that I'm using to change the world. Like, you need to understand how powerful I am, kind of a deal.
Okay. So do you think there was purpose in that season of loneliness?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe when we have seasons of loneliness, maybe if we don't look at them as lack, but look at them as purpose, or look for the purpose in them, maybe there's things to be learned. Okay. I'm going to save the rest.
All right, so 2 things before I ask some more questions. First, I think it's excellent that you're going off to a college out of state where you're going to be pushed to have to get to know other people. I know for myself that was a very beneficial thing when I did that, and so I think you're making a good decision in doing that. The second thing I was going to mention is I think it's incredible you found a way to mention a dragon in your thesis.
Yeah. That's also one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because, I mean, it's a little, like, it says it breathes fire, and it's massive, so I don't know what else it would be. Like, I think Mr. Westfall's right.
Yep. Well, I know in your book of Revelation, I think y'all talked about dragons a little bit.
Yes,
so.
we did.
So in your thesis, you bring up the fact that many people in the Bible grapple with loneliness, right? People like, you mentioned Elijah, Moses, David, Esther. So if all these people knew God so well, I mean, a lot of these people, they had relationships with God in that they were actually talking to God. Why do you think that they still felt loneliness?
I mean, it's kind of a problem of evil thing. Like, why is there sin? Why do people die? Why are people able to feel this? And I do think that there's beauty in it in a way. Like, we are able to struggle so that we can further the kingdom of God and, like, see where he leads us using our, like, that's why I closed it with, we are called to use our imperfect strength weighted by loneliness, because we are very imperfect, but God still wants to use us for some purpose, whatever it may be. So I think it's kind of, yeah.
So do you think then for all those people, God was actually using loneliness or putting them in cases where they would quite physically be alone to help build them or mold them into the people he wanted them to be? Yeah, I would agree with that. I like that you bring up the story of Elijah in your thesis. It's one of my favorite stories.
I think you were the one who told me to use it.
Well, yeah. Well, I appreciate that you listened. So, so in the story of Elijah, right, prior to what you bring up, he had actually just called down fire from heaven. You know, he had his whole competition with the prophets of Baal. He kills all the prophets of Baal, and he thinks there's going to be this massive revival. And lo and behold, there's no massive revival in Israel, and instead, Jezebel just says, I want to kill you even more now. And so you look at his situation, he's incredibly discouraged, and so he's fleeing from Jezebel, he's trying to get away, and he actually cries out to God and says, God, he says, I'm all that you have left, just kill me. Right? He actually asks God to kill him, and God doesn't answer him immediately, right? God says, oh, I'm going to give you food, I'm going to give you water, and then I want you to go to Mount Horeb. And so that's all the answer he gets. So he goes to Mount Horeb, and what happens at Mount Horeb?
He gets I mean, he stands outside and God causes the wind that shatters rocks and the earthquake and the fire. And then the still small voice.
Yeah, so all these big, tremendous things happen. And keep in mind, the whole time he's alone, right? But, after each thing happens, it says, but God was not in the fire, but God was not in the earthquake, right? Where was God?
Still small voice.
Still small voice, right? And so what do you think the significance is in that Elijah had to be alone in this situation? Why do you think he needed to be alone?
I mean, I think God was kind of preparing him for kind of the big stuff that he wanted to do. Like I said earlier, I think that he was reminding him of how big he is and putting him in this situation, and then reminding him that you have to listen for his voice. Like, you can't just expect to hear it like an earthquake or a fire, but you have to listen for it and seek it out. So I don't know why he had to be alone, but I think it was beneficial that he was, because maybe if there was another person there, he wouldn't have been able to hear the small voice.
Yeah, I think that's right. And some translations call it a faint whisper, right? And so you think about it, if you're sitting with a group of people, it can be a lot harder to actually hear if somebody's trying to whisper very faintly to you, right? And so if God is wanting to talk to Elijah and he's going to talk to Elijah with a faint whisper, then it seems like it's very important that Elijah should be alone so that way he can hear from God. Do you think that nowadays we struggle so much to hear from God because we're unwilling to be alone?
I think it's harder to hear it now. Like, you mean within the past 20 years, or like just generally?
Just generally.
Just generally. I'd say so. Or we're kind of just unwilling to take our minds off of ourselves for enough time, because we have a very strong tendency to just kind of think about me. Like, how are these people perceiving me? What can I do to fix this situation? Like, not what can God do to fix this situation, or what is God doing in this person's life, not how can I affect their life. And so, yeah.
Okay. How does this whole topic of loneliness, how does all of this underscore the importance of the church?
Underscore?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So how does it really illustrate or show the importance of the church?
Like the community, that it is important to have community and people reaching out to help people understand, maybe, in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I think, it's almost like God knew what he was doing when, he gave us the church after Christ left, and that, once again, going back to Genesis, it's not good that man should be alone. And so as believers, it is necessary for us to have that community around us that's constantly building us up and then, working with us as we are striving to pursue God. And so I think that's one thing that I would encourage you towards as you're going off to Auburn, is making sure for yourself that you don't just find a community. It's not just about finding any general community, but that you find yourself a strong church community that can, continue to pour into you and help you in your pursuit of God. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Annalee. Do you know who the Surgeon General of the United States is? Not necessarily the name of the person, but you know
no,
the role.
I don't.
Okay, that's okay. I didn't either until this week. But they're the operational head of the United States Public Health Service Commissioned Corps, and thus the leading spokesperson on matters of public health in the federal government of the United States. And very timely, the Surgeon General released a report this Tuesday about loneliness.
Both of my parents sent that to me.
Oh, wow.
Within 10 hours of
Did you
each
read
other.
it?
I did, yes.
All 82 pages?
No.
Okay.
No, I read the article that was like that long about it.
Yeah, I did not read all 82 pages either, but I read some highlights of it, and I thought it was interesting and just very timely with your oral. So a few highlights. Is that even before the COVID pandemic, about half of the U.S. adults reported experiencing measurable levels of loneliness. And and lacking connection can increase the risk for premature death levels comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So you kind of mentioned some of the physical effects of that.
Yeah.
And said that poor connection can include, or physical effects of poor connection can include 29% increased risk of heart disease, 32% increased risk of stroke, and 50% increased risk of developing dementia for older adults. So just kind of reiterates a lot of the things you said, the effects of loneliness. And then also I thought it was interesting that you brought up how like your generation struggles with this specifically. They did say that it was most pronounced in young people aged 15 to 24. So both of us fall in that. And that age group had 70% less social interaction with their friends than 20 years ago, which I think in your interview, it sounds like you kind of hit on two major things, like social media is obviously really prevalent in that age group, and that's also the age when you usually leave home and go off to college. So the report doesn't allocate federal funds to combat loneliness, however, it offers some suggestions that government agencies and officials might be able to pursue based on 6 pillars. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts if you think these are helpful things that will actually address the problem of loneliness. So the first is strengthening social infrastructure, which includes things like parks and libraries, as well as public programs. Second is enacting pro-connection public policies at every level of government, including things like accessible public transportation or paid family leave. Third, mobilizing the health sector to address the medical needs that stem from loneliness. 4, reforming digital environments to critically evaluate our relationship with technology. And 5, deepening our knowledge through more robust research into the issue. And then 6, cultivating a culture of connection, which is so vague, but
Culture of connection.
what do you think about any of those? Do you think those are actually helpful to combating the loneliness epidemic in our country?
I would say, I mean, community is the most important thing, but I think above the community, like it's like the umbrella analogy where it's like God's got to follow you wherever you go. He's like a little umbrella. So I think finding a community who is going to follow you under the umbrella is very important. And I mean, I think it was Brick that talked about in his oral touch grass, go outside, go to parks, go to library, like just interact with people. Because one of the reasons why I think our generation is so caught up in our own mind is because we are staying inside and we're relying on the relationships that we have on our devices or like in our house rather than going around and meeting new people and hanging out with our friends and things like that. So
Yeah. So those are some good steps for like how we could address loneliness on a personal level. What if we have a friend who we think is experiencing loneliness? What should we do to help them in that?
I think loneliness, maybe you can kind of point it out and you can tell them, hey, like, I think you need to get better about this. But it's ultimately up to them about what they want to do. I think you can help them, tell them that. Tell them, hey, I'm here for you. Like, I know that you struggle with this thing, but, like, it's okay to feel it. And you might have to figure this out and figure out where God is pointing you with this feeling, but I'm always going to be here, so.
That's good. And lastly, before I pass the mic off, you kind of just touched on this, but what should the church be doing to address loneliness in our society?
I think just being that community and that open arms kind of a deal is important for the church. I think my church does that very well, especially with the older people, like, not older, like, not, like, teenagers, or after college and upward. Like, I think they do a very good job of, like, the adults kind of bringing people in and making them feel loved and things like that, so.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Okay. We're coming close to the end. I did want to just revisit, you talked about 2 different responses to loneliness, and one of them being that we isolate ourselves even more, which I think is so ironic that we would be lonely, and yet then we would choose isolation.
I know.
And I had really never thought about that before reading your thesis, so I thought that was really interesting. And then you said the other one was that we try and control our calendar, right? That we try and fill it up, make ourselves so busy that we can't feel anything else, but ultimately then we feel it later, right? But I guess I had the observation, and I was wondering what you thought about, are they actually just both forms of control? Yeah.
Like, I struggle with controlling, like, everything. Like, I have to have a hand on literally everything. And recently I've been kind of learning to take a step back and, like, okay, God's got that. He's literally got a hand on everything. Like, he's got it. I don't need to touch that.
Right. And I think that's huge to learn. And I think it's great that you're grappling with that at your age. So, okay. And then I wanted to just add one little piece of advice to build on what Mr. Nelson was saying about, finding you a church community once you get to Auburn. And I would add to that, finding a place where you can serve. So whether that be in your church community, if it's on your campus or whatever, but quickly finding a place and praying for the Lord to open up doors for you to have a place where you can be giving back. So that, because the times of loneliness are going to come, and not that you need to fill that calendar with serving, but just any time you can take the opportunity to get your eyes off self and do those things. And if you have a friend that feels isolated too, bring them with you, right? Serve alongside. So you've done a great job, and are we ready to turn the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to turn the mic to you. I don't have to actually physically. We're going to give you the opportunity to ask a question of your panel.
Okay, I want to know y'all's first impressions of me. No.
Do you really want to know?
Yeah. I feel like I know what you're going to say.
So my first impression of you was this little seventh grader that, interestingly enough, didn't like talking to a lot of people. But this little seventh grade girl really liked dragons. And she really liked coming into the library here and work on writing a book about dragons. And so that was my first impression. But
You
I
and
think
Mr. Z love to make fun of me about that.
we do. It's a fun memory. It's a fun memory. But it's a great memory. And, that was my first impression meeting you. But I would say that my opinion of you has only grown the longer that I've gotten to know you, and I think that you are an excellent student, and I think that you're wise, and above all, I think that you're somebody that you want to be doing what's right, and you want to be pursuing God and pursuing the things that God is about. And so that's what my impression is of you now. So.
Did you finish your book on dragons?
I did not.
Darn.
I went back. It's 45 pages. I went back and looked at it. I was like, oh my gosh, wow, really slaving away at the back of the resource center.
Maybe we'll get the finished product someday.
No.
Midlands a few months before moving here. And I think I just thought you were like a quiet, nice girl.
Yeah.
But then I saw you play volleyball and saw that you can actually be pretty aggressive. But yeah, that was probably my first impression. I know it's not very exciting.
No,
but
fair enough.
Okay. I think my first impression of you was actually a bit of a muddled impression of you, in that I think I didn't know you and Addie apart for a really long time until I actually had you in class, because I didn't work here at the time when you first started coming here or to the upper school. And so then I finally had you in class as a sophomore. And so that would really be my first true impression of you, that I knew Annalee as Annalee. And so my impression of you was that you were quieter than I had expected. I expected, because actually I only knew more of Brady because he was in the same grade as one of my kids, and I knew he could be, at least at that time, pretty out there. And so I thought you would be too. And so I was actually surprised to have you in physics, and that you were actually a lot quieter than I thought you would be. And I think my impression has been confirmed. I mean, I think you're definitely your own person, and that is absolutely true. But you are a quieter person, but as Mr. Nelson said, a very wise person. And so, yeah. So
You loved our section, didn't you?
I did. Why would you ask that, Annalee?
Because you love to talk about how much you loved us, and we were your favorite.
I think it's time for us to wrap.
All right, to conclude, I'll close us in prayer. Father, thank you so much for this past hour that we got to spend here hearing from Annalee and just the things that she's been learning from you over the past few years and through this thesis process about loneliness, and how it can be used to glorify you and use for your purposes, God. I thank you for Annalee and for her just wisdom and her character, and I pray for her as she goes off to Auburn in a few months, that you would help her to apply what she shared today, and as she inevitably feels seasons of loneliness, just being in a new environment far away from everything she's known, that she would use that to turn to you and just glorify you through that. I pray that she would be a light in the darkness at Auburn, God. Thank you so much just for Annalee, for this day, and for who you are, God. It's in your son's name I pray. Amen.